Sarah, I acknowledge that it's 10:30. So if people want to, go about their day, which if they didn't know they already could, they can.
Well, I doubt people have a real big, real busy day ahead.
We do.
Well, and two, I was thinking, this is kind of like the bonus material.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you subscribe to the premium content, this is what you'll get each Sunday.
Well, I'll first say, thanks for inviting my feedback. I also didn't have any previous, I heard it the same time these people did, so I didn't know what you were going to talk about. So this is definitely off the cuff. Also, my first thing, just to kind of maybe set the stage, I was going to say, we haven't done the online church for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might be fair to say that it was a reminder of, like, maybe you forgot how hard it is to preach to only 4 people. Did you feel a little?
Well, I thought that, it was a bit of a challenge. They were all very close to, really like 3 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there were 2 cats often fighting in here too, or right out there, and so there was a lot of distractions.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of distractions in Scripture, and I think that in the same way I was speaking about today, it's good to have something that brings you back to focus you, and to allow you to be to have a center in Scripture from which you can really then see out from. And so there was a lot of a lot of that going. The sermon itself was helping me focus. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I was being distracted, and so there's an analogy there.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I don't want to. So yeah, I'm not sure what direction he expected me to take it, but the thing that I was thinking about as you were preaching was regarding this knowledge and interpretation, and which, how could it be anything else? But often I think that's just the, as the, what do they call it? The intellectual revolution, or just intellectualism. Like, we believe that there is a way for us to know things completely or perfectly, or get down to the root of something. And I feel like the very fact that knowledge is interpretation defies that possibility in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because you can't receive any input without it going through the lens of your own human experience. Your own personal human experience, which mine will be different than yours, because it's my personal human experience.
Which is the basic truth, behind like there's so much interpretation to everything then, like even the most basic things.
And a lot of people,
and so, we might have a blizzard, for example, or a snowstorm, and the interpretation of the snowstorm, for somebody who lived through the snowstorm in 1966, the blizzard of 66, is always interpreted through that. So, my parents have always said, or my dad particularly, I always loved the weather, and things would be really bad. I'd get excited about the blizzard. They say, that's nothing compared to 66. So there's always this interpretive lens because of his experience in life. And so, you can take anything and do that with. I just looked outside and came up with that. Not least Scripture.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so maybe that's an opportunity to draw another comparison or corollary between the fact that he has experienced the blizzard of 66 does not diminish your experience of the blizzard of
96, yeah,
right?
97. Yeah.
So, which I didn't experience. And so just because you have experienced that doesn't mean you should diminish then my experience of a bad snowstorm. If I would think that was like difficult for me to handle in some way, you don't get to tell me, well, you're not allowed to think that's bad because I lived through this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't get to put your lens on me.
You're bringing a Texas experience into North Dakota weather, and it's like you're going to interpret it differently.
Yeah.
And and I need to respect that.
Yeah.
But that therein lies the problem, right?
Now we have 3 different versions of the same snowstorm.
That's the problem of interpretation, and this is the whole point as to which our scripture. Getting back to my message, it's like we have to understand how is it that we can see scripture. All of us see the same words, interpret it differently. How do we somehow apply a value? Not that some scriptures, I shouldn't use that word, but how do we maybe the importance of it? And it's like, and my argument I'm making today, and in the message today, is that the lens that gives us the clearest understanding to interpret the whole of Scripture is that lens through Jesus himself, the person of Jesus, number one, but then even even honing in more, zooming in more to Jesus hanging on the cross becomes something of a point at which we now can see the rest of Scripture. Yeah,
but you're still taking in Jesus on the cross through your own lens.
Yes.
So again, we can't ever get to this like purest view that we think we can. We can't. So therefore, what we I think aim for instead is to see our own lens and understand what we are bringing to that that view, that POV. But a couple things that I want to say on this whole thing is that a lot of people get uncomfortable when what we're talking about gets turned into well, that's my truth, right?
Right.
So that can make people really uncomfortable, and I think that there certainly is a way that can be abused. But I think if we want to be generous and gracious, this is probably more what we're trying to convey in that is, don't disrespect my experience of this snowstorm just because I haven't had the same experience as you have, right? And vice versa. I can't tell you that, well, why do you have to make such a big deal out of this? Things like that, where I don't know your story and I don't know your experience that brought you to this understanding. So, what really, I think the goal would be in these situations is to, instead of saying, well, this is my truth and this is how I viewed a snowstorm, is instead to say, tell me a little bit about how you view this snowstorm, right? And let me add that understanding to my own, which is different, in order to see this in a more thorough and complex way, because it is always more complex than my single view of it.
Well, I mean, I think you're drawing out initially in my message the problem I tried to paint. It's the problem of interpretation. It really is a problem because we cannot get at the thing itself ever. And so, since we can't get to the thing itself, how do we best put together our understandings so that we're also not veering completely off?
Yeah. So this is where I think the cross gets.
This is where I get to the cross.
This is where the cross comes in my opinion, as well, is that what the cross is conveying is not a perfect lens we all need to put on, but a posture at which we approach all these things, all these inputs, which is humility. Mm-hmm. The cross is the ultimate space of humility and vulnerability. And I feel like that is more of how we approach this again. Because here's the thing, you can't, I just think of like people who have lived through incredible trauma or even religious and theological baggage or abuse or, all these things that come to it, or just terrible experiences in their life, losing people very close to them, or who come to the world, things that are no fault of their own, or who come into the world. We just Thursday was World Down Syndrome Day, right? Their lens, a lens of a person with Down syndrome, is entirely different than mine. No less valuable, no less meaningful, and it is not. It's not in any way wrong or clouded. It's still going to be their beautiful experience of Christ in His creation. And so how does their lens help enhance my own? When I come to it and I say, I don't see this in all the ways that it could be understood. Please help me understand yours. Let me add that to my own. Yeah. Instead of saying, oh gosh, I'm seeing this all right, or I can never see it, so just give up. There is something beautiful in the middle of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're still talking about the whole problem raised in the beginning of the sermon, and so. But
it's not a problem when we see it with humility and say, there's more.
It's more a philosophical problem. It's the problem of interpretation.
The
puzzle of interpretation, maybe. It's the fact that I never understand what you mean by okay when you don't put a smiley face with it, or you don't put what does fine mean? This is the problem. But when it comes down to the and so I think you're right. Different people's experience certainly weighs into that. But what do you, as far as the sermon itself, the points made, the implications of it, are there any clarifications? Are there any, if we give 5 minutes, that we can talk about that? Any questions you have, any disagreements you have, any clarifications you would like? Is there anything like that you would like to share with me?
Let's see my notes here. Okay. So I just said that I think that instead of calling the cross the interpretive key, I said I think the humility demonstrated by Christ on the cross is the interpretive key. I don't know.
Well, no, that's a.
I just feel like
a
again
good clarification.
Because the cross can't be reached, the pure form of that. It's like, well, if we would just all put on the cross as a lens, you're never going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So instead, what I can do is try and take a posture.
Yeah.
So, okay, can you read that quote that you read one more time?
Well, the quote that, do you mean, so I had a couple of them. One of them was the quote I shared, and I think it's important, in regards to the implication of how we understand power in our world, and the value of that power, the degree to which what we will do to gain that power, both as individuals but as a group and as a subgroup in culture, being Christians. The quote, one of the quotes I shared was, it used to be that Christians wanted to have leaders who were like them. At least like their self-image. Cared about character, cared about integrity, cared about decency. So it used to be that Christians wanted leaders who were like them, but now they want leaders who like them. Because it's leaders who like them that will give them the power that they want.
Yeah.
And that is an indictment on the Christian Christian subculture in America, if that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to look at the world around us, and I feel like there's a lot of Christians that are fearing the loss of power. And my point is that the loss of power is not the greatest threat to Christianity. In fact, in history, throughout history, it is when Christianity has been disempowered, that is theoretically or in theory experienced the realities of the cross as a group, that it has then been revived and been revitalized most clearly, and so in that sense grown most throughout in its history throughout the world. So there's a huge irony there.
Do you think it's fair to say that the pursuit of power is the opposite of faith?
Well, at least it can be counterproductive to faith. I don't know if I can say it's the absolute opposite, but it can be counterproductive to a faithful life, to a Christ-following life, to a Christ-revealing life. It can certainly, I would say.
Because I think that people,
but we all do it.
People,
that's the thing here. I always try to say in some way or another, like, I'm guilty of it.
Because I think people seek out power generally, like you said, out of fear. And that can be unacknowledged fear, but it's because, having power or control in a situation helps you feel safe. Because you feel like you know what's going to happen because it's all coming from you.
Yeah.
You can predict it all.
This is how I live my life.
Yeah. But
I read scripture and I'm challenged in that. Like, I don't read scripture. Here's the main point that I'm trying to say. I don't read scripture to try and confirm. I don't read it in the sense that I want to confirm that me trying to gain power over everything and control so that I'm safe and my family's safe is the way to live life. No, I read scripture and I'm challenged by scripture. I'm like, gosh, that challenges me to see things differently. And I think that's, and just because I see things differently doesn't mean I make the changes in my life to live them differently, because that is productive toward faith. It's reading scripture in that way that produces faith. But it's not easy. What's easy is to read scripture and the parts of scripture that you like the buffet that I talked about, and interpret scripture in a way that it just confirms the way you live your life. Well, that's easy. But we can all find scripture that will support the way we live our life. Will support the decisions we make in our life. What's hard is when we take something so raw as the cross itself and be like, well, how does that implicate me? How does that define the call upon my life? That's hard. And that's where faith then gets built up, I think. That's a good...
Yeah, so. One of the things that I seek to do is not do everything right, but at least be able to try and figure out what it feels like when I'm starting to do things wrong. How can I figure out when those first flags are
or
going
that you're
up?
walking on the wrong path.
Yeah.
It's just not
when do those
leading
first
to the right.
flags go up?
Yeah.
And so that's why something like recognizing ooh, I'm trying to be in control right now, or ooh, I'm really seeking to have power in the situation, can be something that tells me maybe just take a breath. Maybe think about this a little more. Do you need to be in charge? Do you need to be in control?
Yeah.
Is that a responsibility someone's given you or something that you're taking?
Yeah.
Those kind of things. So at least it helps me get back on the right track.
Yeah. Well, I think that we should wrap that up for our premium content today.
For our premium subscribers.
It's a long service, so if you're still with us, great. If you just have come back after a few days off and you're watching the rest of it, great. But I thank you for engaging like this and challenging me and to think about things a little more deeply. Let's finish the service. We'll do the Nicene Creed and prayers of the church.